What are the biggest challenges when implementing the strategy?
Yeah, it's the personalities in the room and the mental models people bring to the table, hands down. Everyone has biases, right? And it's trying to break down those biases and getting people to understand them. And the nice thing at Koch is we focus a lot in on that. Most people at Koch recognize that they have certain biases, and look, that's just the way the human mind works. So there's too many variables, too much information out there. So our mind develops these mental models and these biases to try and cope with all the information that's out there. It works well for the most part, but there are times when it can be impeding.
Welcome to M&A Science, where leading M&A practitioners share lessons learned from their experience. If you're interested in keeping up with the latest from M&A Science, visit mascience.com. Subscribe to our free newsletter. Every Monday, we share highlights from our interviews and invitations to events as we build the greatest community of forward-thinking M&A practitioners. Again, that's mascience.com. I'm your host, Kison, Patel, CEO and founder of M&A Science. Joining me today is Mike McDonald, Director, Strategy at Koch Engineered Solutions. Koch Engineered Solutions is a number of businesses across several different industries. I'll let Mike explain more about that. Koch Engineered Solutions is also part of Koch Industries, which is massive, over 120,000 employees, one of the largest privately held companies in the world. Today, we're going to talk about developing strategy with business leaders. Mike, how's it going?
Doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm happy to be here in the spot. I get to learn some stuff from you.
Absolutely.
I think the fun background is how we actually met, because a lot of our guests, we bombard them until they finally agree to come on the podcast. But you were nice enough, I think, way back when I was first starting to work on Deal Room, as I want to build a better mousetrap for managing diligence. You're nice enough to give me feedback and talk about all these little things. Now it circles back where I get to flip it around and really learn some things from you on the bigger picture of running M&A deals.
Yeah, look, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a long ride. I think I met you 8 or 9 years ago. So been interesting to see how you built your business and growing your brand.
Can we kick things off a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so, I've been in M&A and strategy for a better part of 20 years. I started in M&A in New York for PricewaterhouseCoopers. And I've kind of gone back and forth between strategy and M&A. I did some consulting work. I worked on the buy side. And I've been with Koch for about 8 years, since the end of 2013, coming up on my 9-year anniversary. And in Koch, I've done some strategy work. I've done a lot of M&A. I ran a business for one of our electronics subsidiaries. And I've been with Koch Engineered Solutions now for the past 2 years, focused almost exclusively on strategy within our businesses.
Pretty well diverse experience. And
Yeah.
We all know it starts with the corporate strategy. Are you accountable for that? Do you work with the CEO? Is it purely up to the business leaders? How does that get formulated?
Yeah, so look, the individual business leaders and it goes down to people like the product managers and such will develop their strategies. But what it really starts with is the vision for the business. Our leadership team develops that vision. We obviously provide input around that. One of the things that we will do is work with the business to try and understand and formulate a view of the world, where we think the world might be headed. And a strategy is ultimately an outcrop of that. How do we compete and drive profit in that world? But you're right, it sits with the business leader, right? I mean, I can sit here and I can, draw a lot of pretty PowerPoints, but the reality is, I'm not going to convince someone with the PowerPoint, who's doing this day to day. My job really is to help the business and the business leaders think about their strategy and formulate it. to challenge their thinking, to push back on things which don't make sense, might make sense in their mind, bring that outside perspective, in essence, to take their thoughts and really upgrade them and challenge them and drive the strategy process within the business. But it's the business leaders that own it, the product managers, if we work with them, the business teams that have to own that strategy.
You flush it out basically with the business unit leaders, and then
and we bring an outside perspective. So I'll give you an example, right? If we're hearing a lot about green energy in the world today, and Koch is in a lot of commodity businesses, and we set out to start thinking about how is green energy impacting the world. And so my team started challenging some of the status quo that, some of the mental models we had in the business. So things like solar energy is not a profitable business without government support, right? That was a long held mental model. When we started doing the analysis, it turns out that that's no longer the case, right? And so we ended up acquiring a business recently based off of some of that analysis, right? That builds solar farms for utility customers. And so, we developed that, we presented the case for that, and our management team bought into it, and it became theirs, right? It became their view. We didn't do that in isolation, by the way. We were working directly with them and keeping them apprised of everything we're doing. Other times we might look to enter a new market or look at a product line and try and understand what we're going to ultimately do with that. And we're working directly with the business, pulling their knowledge, trying to bring outside market knowledge to the table, and trying to formulate a fully rounded, coherent thought process around whatever the question we're trying to answer.
So extra eyes and ears that sits out of their business.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about it, someone, and I'll give you, an example of our, John Zink business, that they do process control, so combustion systems and stuff like that for petrochem and oil and gas. And someone who's been working in that for 20, 30 years, I mean, they're going to have a very detailed knowledge of, their equipment and what it does. But they might not have, the knowledge of, hey, what else is out there? What are some of the other things we're thinking about? And you wouldn't expect them to, right? I mean, that's their expertise. It's our job to come in and say, hey, let's think about this, and have you thought about that? And what do you think about this? And the nice part is we're working with, I work with a management team that is very open to that, and that's our culture at Koch. Is we're very open to those sort of challenges and thinking about the different alternatives out there, and thinking about what else could be there.
Challenge the thinking.
Yeah, and if you actually read, Mr. Koch, who's our CEO and one of our largest shareholders, he's developed our management philosophy, and a key part of it is challenging our superiors, and I ask people who work for me to challenge me and push me, and it's you can have the smartest guy in the room, he's going to be no match for 20 people working together. So I mean that's the general philosophy of it.
I like that philosophy a lot. I'm gonna have to dig into that more.
Yeah.
When you get the strategy shaping, how do you socialize that with corporate development?
Yeah, so we're part of the corporate development team. So I focus mostly on strategy and point of view, what we call point of view, which is thinking about the world. But my team, the team that reports to me, does about half their time on M&A and half their time on strategy point of view. My colleagues are on the M&A side. My boss does both. And so we're interlinked. The strategy is a key part of it. I'm with KES, Koch Engineered Solutions. All of our businesses kind of have something, are aligned, have a similar type of structure for their corporate development teams. because the two go hand in hand, right? You can't go spend $1 billion buying another business without having some sort of underlying strategy on how you go about driving value from that deal, and that's where the strategy comes in. And it overlaps, right? So even though I'm not out there negotiating my current role, I'm not out there negotiating deals. I'm working with the team that is. We're working with the team presenting to Mr. Koch on whether we want to go ahead and spend his money. So it's we're ingrained with that team, and I think that works well, right? I mean, I've seen other corporate strategy practices which are siloed, and I sort of scratch my head a little bit. I don't understand how that works, especially if you're trying to acquire and be acquisitive, because M&A is an outcrop of strategy. It's one of the levers you can pull to drive value in your business.
How many people in strategy does it take to get that there? Because I get amused by some larger corporations that have quite a few people sitting in a strategy group, and always just been curious about that. Have you found that in terms of number of people, size, or anything correlated when you think about strategy, people dedicated to strategy?
I tend, if you think about the overall, if you think about a deal, and you can either buy a new platform or you can do some sort of a bolt-on or something like that, you're going to need a lot of help from the existing business either way, right? So from the M&A side, it's a handful of people, and the strategy side, again, I mean, if the business, if you're challenging the business to drive value, and it's their strategy, you still need only a handful of people. So it's probably 1-to-1, maybe a little bit more on the strategy side, depending on how complex the business is. In our group, it's probably it's about 50, maybe a little bit more on the strategy point of view side. I kind of talk, I like one of our businesses, Molex. They've got 40,000 employees, and their strategy corporate development team is 12, 14, 15, something in that range, right? So, they're stretched thin, right? So, I'm sure you can always have more, but it doesn't take a very large army, in my opinion.
That's true. Then you got folks that wear the dual hat. They sort of have strategy and Corp Dev.
And frankly, there are, when we are stretched, and we do this, and a lot of people do this, if we're stretched, there are firms out there like, you've heard of McKinsey and Bain and BCG. We can leverage.
Never heard of them.
Never heard of them, right? And we leverage consultants when we need to, and that's what they're there for. They're there to scale up when you need to.
Cool. How do you come up with the M&A strategy?
Yeah, look, so the way I talk about it is, strategy is all about driving profit, right? It's the way the way you're planning on trying to grow your profit, and there's two ways to do that. You can cut your costs or grow your top line, grow your business, and M&A is one of those levers you can pull. And so, if you're Starbucks or Coca-Cola or someone like that, you're not going to go out and go buy an oil and gas business, right? You're going to have to, there's got to be a kind of a reason for that. And I tend to look at, for me, it's around the capabilities. So if you have an existing business, you have a core set of capabilities. And when you say, look, we want to move into this new area. So I'm going to pick on Coca-Cola here for a second. I know nothing about them, so I apologize to them. But they might say, hey, you know what? We sell Coke, we sell Diet Coke. The world is moving into kombucha or something, right? It's a new type of beverage.
That one, I'm drinking kombucha.
There you go. They might say, look, that's where we're going to go. What are we good at? We're really good at bottling. We're good at marketing on a mass scale. What does it take to be in kombucha? Well, these are smaller brands, right? It's more word of mouth, right? And we may not know how, it might be in glass bottles. Yours is in a glass bottle. It's a fermentation process and such. These are things that we don't have a capability. So we can either go try and build that capability ourselves, or we can go buy it. And it's probably a combination of both, right? Someone like Coca-Cola might say both. And we're the same way. And I think that's, in my opinion, that is probably one of the better ways to think about M&A is you're acquiring a set of capabilities that you can drive value, right? That can help you get into a new market. It can help you get into a new product line, a new technology, can bring talent in that you didn't have before. And so, when I think about a strategy process and I think about taking a business in a certain direction, right? It's missing certain capabilities because if it had those capabilities, it would already be in that position that you wanted to take it to. And so that's what you're trying to solve for is how do we close the gap on the capabilities we need to succeed?
Okay. That's what about stuff maybe outside of capabilities? I'm thinking of we work with roll-ups and they're consolidating a market. Do you think of that as capabilities in a different way?
I mean, so let's, and I'm thinking about, for some reason it's coming to my head, if you take like a distributor business, right? And so these are sort of local businesses that are buying product, holding it and selling it to smaller customers. You might say, hey, we have Mid-Atlantic, we've got the Southeast, we've got the South, but hey, I don't really have anything in the Pacific Northwest, right? So I have a choice. I can either build it or I can try and buy it. And yeah, that's a pretty common question you ask in M&A is build versus buy, and what's the trade-off there? I kind of view that as the same way. I mean, you're bringing in-house something that you don't have, and I call that capabilities.
Okay.
So in that case, you're entering a new market, and you're buying essentially a customer base.
Okay, so going back to strategy, you started with driving profits, that you can either cut costs, grow revenue, and that lends to the discovery of capabilities. And then it's M&A as a tool against that to how do you execute on achieving that capabilities. I'm trying to get is a little step by step here, because those are always the fun ones when I get Mike's framework for developing a strategy. And
well, so let's start at the top, right? So let's take Coca-Cola for a second. And okay. So Coca-Cola says, okay, what is going to happen to beverages over the next 20 years, right? And they're going to put in and say, look, there's going to be, dietary issues that come up, right? We're going to be, you have all these consumers in India and Africa and China who are making more money. They're going to want to stop drinking water and drink, quote, Western drinks, right? And so they come up with this view of the world. Then they'll say, hey, look, now that we have this view, what is our vision? What do we want to be in this world? They can say, hey, we want to sell Coca-Cola to everyone in the world, or we want to be the world's premier beverage company, or we want to be something along those lines. And that's where their vision comes in. Okay. And again, this is all an iterative process. And so they want to be the premier beverage company in the world, right? Not necessarily the best, the Coca-Cola being the number one beverage. They want to be a company which has a collection of beverages to be the world's leader in beverages, right? That might be their vision. So then they start to say, okay, for us to do that, let's understand where we are today. So we're the number one seller of sugar based sodas, right, and diet sodas. But we have these gaps in these other areas, right? So let's start thinking about how do we go and fill those gaps, right? So we can launch a kombucha line, or we can go do something else, or what have you, and to try and get that, or we can go try and buy someone. Maybe we go buy the local brewery, the local kombucha brewery. Maybe we go buy a water company and start. And I think Coca-Cola owns Dasani, and go down that pathway. So so that's where the sort of that strategy comes in. It starts with in my mind, the view of the world. It gets, and that's a well-informed view of the world. It's not, just a whiteboard session. There's a lot of thought that goes behind that. And then the question is how do we want to win in that world? How do we want to win in that environment? And from there, that starts to ask the question, what is it going to take to win in that world? And what are we missing? And now you can start to see your strategy starts to come out of that. So, if it takes these three things to win in this world and I have one of them, I got to go get the other two. And, it's going to take, it's going to take going to acquire or build those.
Okay. I want to make sure I got this right. This is Mike McDonald's framework on strategy here. Number one is the view of the world.
Yep.
And I think the where we want to be is part of that vision.
Yeah. So it's defining how we want to win in that world.
Or is that a separate step?
I have a personal pet peeve. I hear it very often. Hey, I want to play in this. We want to play, right? And I kind of correct people and says, no. If you want to play somewhere, then you go on a soccer field. You want to win in this, right? Because winning is very different than playing in a market.
I like that. Okay, so that's all together. The vision, the worldview, right? This is where we see things going, and then where we want to be. It's really a different thinking there because you develop the worldview, then you really start thinking of your organization. Where do you want to be? Then you get how do we win? Which I guess the next is what does it take? Which is that's how do you fill in the gaps? Mm-hmm. What does it take? And then how to actually do it.
Yep.
That's probably when you start identifying companies and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes both ways. I mean, you might be in an environment that's in decline, right? So using Coca-Cola again, and they say, hey, people aren't buying as many sugary drinks, for dietary reasons. Okay, so that's the world we're looking at. And so how do we win in that world? Well, we want to be the last man standing. Okay, so we need to we need to be as lean as possible, as efficient as possible. And you see that in commodity markets. We want to be the low cost provider because we want to be the last one standing. And that's where the cost cutting side of things comes in. And obviously they're not mutually exclusive. I mean, you do both. So.
And then I guess that whole shaping gets to sort of those steps that we described.
Yeah.
Where you really figure it out. This is what we're trying to do, and what specific things that we needed to get there. With this strategy, how do you ensure that you have alignment with business unit leaders? And it's interesting too, because I think you're working across quite a few different business unit leaders. So what does that look like? Is there a process around it?
And it's not just, it's not just different, KES where we are is a collection of, I think, 10 different businesses, and some fairly small, some very big. And you got to work with each business leader is very different, right? They come at things differently. They think differently. And that's great, right? I mean, they've all been successful in their own certain ways. Number one is you have to gain their trust, right? You're there to help them, help them drive their strategy, help them drive their business. You got to work with them, right? So like I said, I'm never going to go deliver them a PowerPoint and say, here you go, this is what you got to do. It's sitting down with them and challenging them and taking their input. Right. And understanding their business. And
so ultimately they own the strategy.
Yes.
You don't show up with the PowerPoint saying, hey, here's an update on the strategy that we changed for you today.
No, yeah, exactly. And look, I'll take them through the framework. And so like I had one of the CEOs, and I said to him, look, I'm going to take you through a strategy process. It's going to be painful and arduous. And he kind of rolled his eyes and said, sure, we'll go through it. And because, my boss is telling me to go through it. And so I took them through it. In the end, they shaped their vision based off the work we did. And I say we, it's really me and that business in particular. They shaped their capabilities. They've structured their business based around this. And they're out there pounding the pavement, executing on it and sharing that vision with our leadership and our leadership's leadership, and all the way up the chain. And so, but I didn't come up with anything, right? All I did was try and pull as much external information to challenge their thinking, get them to really think outside the box and challenge their own business model and challenge their own legacy thinking. And in this case, this team is pretty good at that kind of stuff. I mean, they're pretty open about that, and but sometimes you'll get a team that's closed off, and it takes a lot more work, takes a lot more time, and you need buy-in from everyone really to make it work.
What's that strategy exercise like? How do I do it here at M&A Science?
Yeah, look, I used workshops a lot. It's bring everyone together, and what I've done in the past is I'll sometimes give them a case study, and more like just a kind of a team building exercise, a paper exercise to make them think a little bit, but also make them a little bit more vulnerable. There's one in particular I use that has a twist in the end that people have gotten upset at me about, frankly.
I want to hear about it.
What's that?
I want to hear about it now.
Yeah, so it's interesting. You can find it online. It's called Carter Racing, and it's a question of, do you race or not? And they give you a little bit of data, and there's a lot of financial information, and it comes down to it's sort of a coin flip whether you do it or not. And the teams that do it correctly ask for more information, but no one's ever asked me for more information since doing it. And if you read, it's developed by Northwestern University, and no one ever asked for the more information according to them. But the data turns out it's from NASA, and it's the Challenger accident, right? And so most people say, hey, we want to race, we want to fly, right? And so people kind of are stunned. And when I did it, I was pretty stunned. Hey, we literally sent 7 astronauts to die here, right? So, it disarms people a little bit, and then we start getting into kind of the, hey, what is, let's talk about your business. Let's talk about what you're good at. Let's talk about what you're not good at. Let's talk about the world. Where is the world headed to? What do you think is most important? How can we answer certain questions? Let's go answer those questions. So you start to kind of build off of that, and with the team, working directly with the team. And it's not a day process, right? It takes time, takes multiple meetings, it takes multiple sessions. You leave, you gather more information, you bring it back, and it's iterative. And frankly, it's no two processes are the same, right? I mean, you want to cater it to the business, cater to their personalities, and cater it to what they're ultimately asking for.
That's quite the icebreaker there.
It is. It's not. It's funny. I had one person, and most people will get over it pretty quickly and realize what it is what it is, right? But I had one person who got very upset and actually post the meeting called me up and said it was a very unfair case study to do. And I said, it's not meant to be fair, right? It's it's designed to be, provocative, and that's the point. And they're like, I'd use a different one if I found it to be as effective, but that one works well.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Maybe that could be another podcast. We can workshop a whole strategy session. And
sure. Yeah.
What are the biggest challenges when implementing the strategy?
Yeah, it's the personalities in the room and the mental models people bring to the table, hands down. Everyone has biases, right? And it's trying to break down those biases and getting people to understand them. And the nice thing at Koch is we focus a lot in on that. Most people at Koch recognize that they have certain biases, and like that's just the way the human mind works. So there's too many variables, too much information out there. So our mind develops these mental models and these biases to try and cope with all the information that's out there. It works well for the most part, but there are times when it can be impeding, right? So, I did a deal once, it didn't go through, but a company they were looking to buy one of their competitors. And we're looking at synergies, and all the information was public, and the competitor was producing at I think it was 15 to 20% below what my client was producing at in terms of their cost to produce. And we presented, hey, here's a synergy. If we adopt their manufacturing processes, we can lower our costs by X. And our management team they could not get around the fact that their competitor was lower cost than them. Right? They just couldn't. They said, no, there's no way they're lower cost. There's no way there's lower cost. These guys are not as smart as us. There's no way, and it's, that was a mental model that, hey, we're the best management team out there. And, you do see that one quite a bit. And, we just got to break through it. And ultimately the deal never went through, partially because they couldn't justify the valuation because they didn't use that potential synergy. Now I could be wrong. I mean, there could be something in there that our management team just didn't explain to us. But that's an example of it. You get mental models around certain markets, right? I mentioned sort of the solar market. Koch had a mental model previously that's it was uneconomic without subsidies, and they don't necessarily want to get into a market where subsidies drive value. But when we challenge them, and the nice part is our management team is open to those challenges, and they're humble enough to say, hey, we were, things have changed, right? And our mental model no longer holds. And so, it's ultimately is challenging those mental models and those biases, which really do become the biggest challenge I've seen.
I think there's two things. There's bias, which I'm interested in talking more about. And then there's uncertainty in general, because you build a model with all your predicted synergies. And how do you get that confidence level in achieving those things? I think it's almost like a mix between the two. I don't know if you look at it that, or you look at it as one and the same.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's a little bit of, if you're always challenging those mental models, you can get to, analysis or paralysis by analysis, right? Where you're always trying. So at some point you've got to move on. You've got to convince yourself that, hey, the 95% that I know or the 85% that I know is enough to kind of move forward with this.
Well, let's give that stakeholder. You got somebody that's not buying into the model. Yeah, how would you decipher if there's a bias there, given the manufacturer? There's no way they're going to beat us on margins, or if it's more of an uncertainty that I don't think that's going to happen, or I don't think you're going to capture that cost synergy you're anticipating.
I have on the M&A side, we talk about there's uncertainty in every deal, right? And you need to understand that, and individuals that have a better are willing to accept different levels of uncertainty and different levels of risk. I think when you go into a deal, at the very least, you should understand most of the risks, most of the key risks that can really impact value. So that cost synergy, around that. Hey, we know the culture over there, for example, and we may not be able to, to adopt it, or our management team may not be able to, or our team may not be able to adopt their methods or whatever for manufacturing, right? That's a risk. Culture is obviously kind of a key risk and uncertainty. But in terms of biases, I think those present differently, right?
Okay.
They tend to be I find biases tend to present more as a certainty, right? Hey, no one ever makes money in this region, right? That's a mental model with a certain certainty around it, which I would challenge, right? But coming around and saying, look, I'm not sure if we can break into this market, right? Is more of an uncertainty. So I think it sort of presents differently.
That makes, I get it now. That helps when you explain it that way. Now, on the biases, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so this is you got to have the right people in the room. There's no doubt about it.
Like a shrink, a therapist, or something? Like
yeah, so
a police officer, a therapist, and
yeah, exactly.
an ambulance paramedic.
Yeah, put a psychiatric couch in the back and analyze someone. But the nice part about where I work, the team is, we challenge each other, and we're there to challenge, and we're open to that, right? And so I'm open to someone saying, hey, I think you might be thinking about this incorrectly. And that could be my own mental model and my own biases. And so that's part of it. But I mean, if you have people in there who just are unwilling to accept challenge, then it's gonna be very hard to break through. And I've dealt with people like that. And sometimes you ask questions. I don't know if you ever heard of the 5 whys. I think Toyota came up with it. Yeah. The 5 whys is actually a really good way to kind of get to someone starting to question it. But ultimately, the person themselves has to recognize that they have this bias. I'm not gonna say, hey, look, I think you're biased here, right? If they're not open to that, then they're just dismissive. So it's ultimately, pushing back. And I've made so many mistakes trying to get people to recognize biases and just doing it the wrong way. And the best way to do it is just to ask questions and try and ask, not quite leading questions, but questions that kind of get to the root of it. All right. Because in the end, I mean, that person might be correct, right? They've developed that mental model, that bias based on their experience, and it could be me that's incorrect. And I got to understand.
Yeah. So it sounds like when trying to unearth the biases or handle it, underpinning it is this state of open-minded versus closed-minded that you got to deal with.
100%. And there's varying degrees of it.
Yeah. And it sounds like an element that you want to demonstrate you're open-minded first by listening to the other person and get a sense of where their positioning comes from. And then I guess it's kind of like back and forth, right? Here's some of this information, see how receptive they are versus not receptive.
Yep.
But and this is fun stuff. This is a lot of stuff I do a podcast with my daughter. I don't know. I think I told you about it, but she did a few M&A Science stuff. Now she's graduated, but I do one where it's basically teaching kids leadership lessons. Anybody listening wants to check it out. It's called Boss Move, just one word. But a lot of it comes back to this, where it's like fundamental leadership lessons, open-minded versus closed-minded. How do you deal with closed-minded people? Mm-hmm. Well, part of it's like, can you empathize with them? Can you connect with them to get a sense of why they think the way they do first? And then it allows you to get that reciprocity to encourage them to want to hear you out and learn your perspective versus just defending opposing views till death. I don't know. Is that kind of similar vein, or am I completely off of the?
You're 100% correct. And I find that no one is 100% closed off. Right. And frankly, if they are, they're probably not very much fun to hang out with. So there's always, people are always willing to rethink something else, rethink a little bit. Now, look, it might not be worth your time to kind of break through that. It might be a lost cause, but most people, are fairly open-minded in the sense that they're, if presented with opposing information, they'll either try and justify their existing position or they'll rethink it a little bit. And it's getting back to it. It's trying to kind of break through and make people somewhat vulnerable in those strategy sessions, right? Get them to rethink things a little bit, right? To challenge their own biases, their own mental models, their own thought processes.
What if you got a BU leader that's just crazy? Like they're seriously out of their mind when you reach that conclusion? Do you have any recourse in the Corp Dev group? Can you?
No, I mean, look,
Do you bring it up to the C-suite? Like say, hey, I
well,
think Joe's
look,
lost his marbles here.
Yeah, and so and not so much lost their marbles, but I've had in the past, first off, every strategy session I do, our C-suite knows about it, right? They're aware of it. I mean, we're not siloed or anything, and they want to understand progress and such, and so if we can't get through to a management team, then there's nothing I can really do about it. We'll let the C-suite know and say, hey, we need to take a different path. I don't give up easily, and I'll try and find different alternatives. Maybe it's me personally. Maybe I rub them the wrong way. I mean, you're sitting in New York, and I went. I spent a lot of time in New York, and I went to college there, so I have a bit of a New Yorker personality, and that doesn't go over as well with some people. And so it could be me, and maybe I'll send in one of my team members, and maybe you can kind of break through a little bit better, and maybe my approach isn't wrong, or I maybe I have the wrong opinion here, and maybe these guys are actually correct. So there could be a lot of reasons that someone is nuts, right? In the end, they could still be correct.
Absolutely true. I think of you as more of a hybrid, by the way, like maybe half New York, half Midwest.
Yeah, well, yeah, I've toned down a little bit living in Chicago the last 8 years. It's funny. I go back to New York now, and I'm not sure I can handle it.
I like it.
Yeah.
That's the rumor going around. M&A Science may put our headquarters studios out here.
Oh yeah, good for you guys.
And you have
a lot of activity out there. A lot more action than Chicago. Oh, Chicago's no slouch either.
A lot of motivated Corp Dev folks hungry to get deals done. So good spot for us. In terms of strategy, like where do you stop with strategy? Do you go on into the deal itself? Like what should be the right approach there?
Yeah, so we'll go past the deal, right? Because when you develop a strategy and you say, look, we need this, right? We need to go get this. If this is a new market, or it's a capability, or it's a product, or whatever, right? You have a reason for buying that business, which is some of the bets that you're taking to acquire it. But once you acquire it, you actually got to go execute. Okay, so then, and you have this business that's sitting out there, right? And that business is people, and they're now part of a large organization. So, we tend to be involved quite a bit post the deal, right? Like an M&A, when I do the M&A side of it, I tend to get to 60 days post deal and kind of hand it off to the integration teams and such. But the strategy tends to go past that. And tends to be quite involved in trying to help execute on those bets, trying to help execute on the synergies that were developed, helping the business set their own strategy, right? And I've seen this before, where you acquire a business and you have certain notions about that business. You go in and they say, hey, your thought process is wrong here for these reasons. Right. And then you have to go back and you have to rethink your strategy. And it might not be a lost cause, but, hey, it throws a wrench into the mix, right? That there's something fundamentally different about that business or that industry that you're entering that you missed.
It's like you want to keep the thinking around strategy to stay intact and not go sideways.
And strategy never really ends, right? I mean, I think it's Disney that does this. You can actually look online and find their vision statements. And they constantly change it, right? Because the world around them is changing. And so, I tend to view an organization that, creates a vision, creates a strategy, right? And doesn't deviate or doesn't kind of tweak it or doesn't make improvements to it as being short-sighted. I think if you're constantly changing, you're switching 180, that's a problem, obviously. But, if you're, as you're going down your pathways, you're learning more, you should be impacting kind of what you're doing, right? That should inform, as you learn more, that should inform your decisions and your strategy and your vision as you move forward in the pathway you're taking.
How do you iterate on that? It's almost like that's a broader thing, is your strategy. How often do you change it, assess it? Are there certain trigger points or things that prompt you to do so?
Yeah, I mean, you're always, you've got to be open-minded, and, you have to look at existing or information that comes across your desk and say, hey, wait a minute, you recognize this is a fundamentally different thing here. This is changing our viewpoint. I've seen companies make large acquisitions based on a certain viewpoint, and a disruptive technology comes out, and we missed it. We have to change course, right? So that's where that humility comes in, and having to constantly look over your shoulder and be paranoid, if you will, and try and learn more, right? I mean, if you stick, if you're completely closed-minded and you stick to your guns no matter what, then you're going to find yourself in trouble. So yeah, I don't think there's any set criteria. Hey, you should relook at it every 18 months, but depending on the business, maybe you look at it much quicker. Maybe you wait it out a little bit longer, right? And ask yourself what's changed, every 2 years or something. There's no real set time frame in my mind. I think it's just up to the business.
Yeah, because it could vary on quite a bit of things. It sounds like there's things that bubble up in the conversation that would prompt you for things like that, a big news announcement or something.
Yeah.
You got any interesting stories where you screwed up strategy?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's, and we've done deals. I've done deals where, hey, there's something around that we missed. I'll give you a really good one, actually. So way back in the day, I was working with a company that developed a technology to extract uranium very cheaply, right? And so said, hey, let's go buy different some uranium assets. And one of the risks that came out of that was, hey, uranium, because of green energy and that type of stuff, uranium, the demand for uranium is going through the roof. But if something happens, right, if something blows up somewhere, then this can go south. And ultimately, that's what happened, right? So Fukushima happened, I think, 6 months after this company started acquiring assets. And the uranium price just fell through the floor. I mean, Germany started shutting down their nuclear power plants. China stopped building them. And so, it's a risk we identified, but, it's one of those things that, hey, it happened, right? And it was a problem.
I don't know if he screwed up the strategy. I feel like that was a gold. Mother Nature sort of just squashed that thing.
Oh yeah, but yeah, exactly. Mother Nature had some fun that day. Yeah, I mean, look, I've screwed up around, a lot of times around just the process and trying to get people to think differently, right? So I had one group that they said, hey, we develop a part for cars and we don't know what our market share is, right? And I said, all right, hang on. I went down to my rental car and I took photographs underneath the hood of all the parts, and I said, you can count them up. And you can see, hey, this one's your competitor, and this one is, is this, and challenge them that way. And boy, did I read the room wrong. That did not go over very well, right? And so, that was a lesson learned on my part in terms of how to, get people to try and change their mind and challenge those biases. So, I mean, there's a lot of lessons here and there. I mean, where you learn things in terms of, hey, we went down a pathway and we really screwed up. Because you're constantly iterating, I struggle to find one where I say, hey, we developed a strategy. 5 years later, we look back and it was a completely wrong pathway. Because if you're doing it right, you're challenging yourself, and you might find a year down the path, the road, hey, this is incorrect, right? We need to pivot. And I've had lots of pivots, right? Hey, we were thinking about this and wrong. We need to shift gears a little bit.
It sounds like one of the lessons learned was having that bottoms up approach as opposed to top down. And I think even examples you provided earlier were very much around that design thinking. How do you sort of pull those things up so people can put their stuff out there and get more of that collective thinking together? I don't know. Does that sound about right? Because
yeah, it does. Yeah.
Sounds like you don't come in telling people, come in guns blazing and saying, hey, are you challenging yourself on this?
That's the New Yorker in me coming out, right? And I was dealing with some people from Detroit, and the auto guys in Detroit are similar to New York, and so it can be a little bit combative. But in the end, we actually, we got to where we were going, and what we ultimately needed to. But it was clearly the wrong approach I took.
Hey, Mike, thanks so much for taking the time. I learned a lot about strategy and enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, look, this was great, and I'm happy to help out in any way I can.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Here's to the deal.